Today I'd like to talk about affordable housing and the complications that are involved in terms of trying to provide affordable housing. This particular situation talks about Farmingdale community on Long Island. In this particular community, there were 9 tenants. They were Hispanic immigrants, and they felt, at least from their perception, there was a systematic effort to drive them out of Farmingdale. A lawsuit ensued, and there was a settlement, and the town, as a result of the settlement, agreed to build affordable housing units to replace the ones that these tenants had lost. And so a $35 million workforce affordable housing development will open this June of 2024 in Farmingdale. The tenants were represented by Stefan Krieger, who is a law professor at Hofstra University. And Stefan, along with his students, there were about 100 of them over the period of the litigation. They represented the tenants, and they were successful. They're going to build 71 units. It will be called Sterling Green. It is done by D&F Development Group, LLC of Levittown, and it will be on Route 109 in Farmingdale. They're going to hold a lottery in April for the applicants, and the rents are very reasonable, $1,294 for a one-bedroom to $1,905 for a three-bedroom. The annual salaries needed to apply for this affordable housing are between $36,000 to $95,000, and that depends on the size of the family we're speaking about. Very unusual situation here. Unusual in that the tenants, for the most part, tire of the process. It's a long, complicated process. It involves a lot of litigation, a lot of depositions, a lot of investigations, a lot of establishment of facts. Very difficult, and most tenants, they want to move on, move to maybe new housing, to a new area where they feel more welcomed. And the village that you are suing obviously has more resources. It has money, and it has lawyers from insurance companies. So because of that, it's very unusual for tenants to prevail in this situation. The tenants depended on Hofstra University, a university in Nassau County. At their law school, they have a law school housing clinic. And as I mentioned earlier, about 100 of the students from the law school were involved in the litigation. Their legal strategy was different. They accused the village of outsourcing to private companies the gentrification of an area in Farmingdale called Little Latin America, where these tenants lived. The current mayor of Farmingdale, Mayor Ralph Ekstrand, says there's really no bigotry in Farmingdale. Farmingdale is a very accepting community, very welcoming community, and what these tenants experienced maybe was a bit unusual, but not typical of the Farmingdale of today. The group that developed the affordable housing is called the Long Island Housing Partnership. It is a nonprofit, and it promotes affordable housing. There's been a change in the makeup in Farmingdale. Hispanics went from 3.6% to 12.6% of Farmingdale's population between 1980 and 2000. So those 20 years, almost a fourfold increase in the number of Hispanics in Farmingdale. By 2022, they're now up to 14.1%. So again, you can see the increase in Farmingdale. Some of the tenants speak about the hostility that they encountered. In 2002, for example, someone left a spent .50 caliber anti-aircraft shell by an outdoor hiring site for day laborers in Farmingdale. So they established this hiring site for the day laborers, many of whom were Hispanics, and they didn't get the best reception in the world, obviously, at this hiring site. Someone also carved a depiction of a gun into a wooden picnic table that was there, and the site, which was off Route 110 in Farmingdale, closed within a month. So the hostility was real. People felt it, and they could no longer have that particular hiring site, so they would hang out on corners, and they would be hired to work day jobs. At this time, hostility rose across Long Island. There were several hate crimes, the most prominent of which was the killing of Marcello Lucero in Patchogue. He was an immigrant, and some teenage boys killed him. The place where the tenants lived was 150 Secatog Avenue. It was a 54-unit apartment building, and it was referred to as Little Latin America because many of the Hispanic immigrants, some of whom were legal, some of whom were illegal, lived there. From the tenants' point of view, they said the complex was a disaster. It was infested with rats, cockroaches, and mold. There were many leaks. There were collapsing ceilings. Heat was sporadic. And the tenants claimed that the village authorities did not force the landlord to make repairs. And so their allegation was that this was part of a gentrification plan, that they would allow the building to go down into disrepair to where the tenants would decide to move out of the building, and therefore the building could be torn down and a better building could be constructed on the same site, and that building could rent out for much higher rents than 150 Secatog was getting at that time. The sale of the building was fast-tracked to a high-end developer. So right there you see the pattern. These tenants, many of whom were struggling to make ends meet, working day jobs in the community, many of those were eliminated from the building, forced out of the building. There was the fire in 2004. This forced their evacuation. No one knows the exact cause of the fire, but there, of course, are suspicions. Right after the fire, these 9 tenants went to Krieger's office the next day for help. So they were directed to the Hofstra University Law Clinic. They went to the professor's office and they pleaded their case. Now, why the case is so unusual, it went on for 8 years. There was a federal discrimination lawsuit that was filed against the village because why is it that these tenants from a lower economic group were being eliminated from the village? There was no housing that was available to them. The housing that they lived in had burned down, and this now luxury development was going to be built, which of course they could not afford. The lawsuit was settled in 2014. The village agreed, as part of the settlement, to build 54 units of affordable housing. So a great settlement in the sense that now there would be affordable housing for these tenants who had been burned out of the home where they did live. Also, as part of the settlement, they would pay the 9 plaintiffs, those tenants who had been burned out of their building. They would pay the 9 plaintiffs an undisclosed sum for damages. The village requested a non-disclosure agreement, so we don't know the exact amount, and the tenants consented to that agreement. The 9 plaintiffs were given priority for the new affordable housing units that would be built, these 54 new units. 150 Secatog, where they had lived formerly, was renovated. It is now called Fairfield Courtyard at Farmingdale. The rents range from $2,400 for a studio to $3,400 for a two-bedroom. So we can see by the nature of those rents that the tenants who formerly occupied 150 Secretog could obviously not afford to live in this new development. Another storefront nonprofit from the area, Casa Comunal, has been replaced by an ultra-luxury apartment building. Those rents go up to $4,395 for a two-bedroom apartment. So we can see the pattern here. These properties, which were used by the immigrants in the area. Casa Comunal was this nonprofit that served the immigrants. They were torn down. More luxurious buildings were put in their place, and these command very high rents. Example, in terms of the area, Jose Hernandez is 56 years old. He works as a day laborer, and he makes about $150 a day when he is employed. And of course, he can't get work every day. As a day laborer, it is hit and miss. He was waiting at a gas station next to 150 Secretog Avenue, where the immigrants used to live. He is from El Salvador. He rents a basement room for $800 a month, which he said is very difficult for him to afford, to get that $800 a month. And you can see why, because you're not always making that $150 a day and you have other living expenses. He claims, and many of the former tenants who were interviewed claim that they are treated better now by the white residents. They're more accepted. And before, he felt there was much more discrimination. The immigrants are happy with the outcome to the story. One of the daughters of a tenant who witnessed the struggle was so touched by what she saw in terms of the immigrants who were fighting for their rights that she herself became a lawyer. So you can see the positive outgrowth of the story. Now, why the situation with regard to affordable housing is so complex and complicated can be demonstrated in a story like this. You have the tenant's point of view, and you have the landlord's point of view, and you have the real estate developer's point of view, and you have the town's point of view. So for the landlords, they are trying to make the most profit they can from their building. They have tenants who, in some cases, because of their economic situation, might not be the most reliable at paying their rent every month. They might not be the best at the upkeep themselves of the apartments. So it is a complex situation from their point of view. They're trying to make money on the building. And certainly many of them, I am sure, are compassionate individuals who want to help their tenants. But there's always that idea of, well, they must pay their property taxes, they must pay for their light and heating and expenses, property taxes. All of these go into the mix. And so landlords are in a difficult bind themselves. Sometimes we like to blame the landlords, but the picture, of course, is more complicated than that. Not every tenant is an upstanding tenant. Not every tenant is reliable. I'm not saying in this case that they weren't, but generally speaking, that's a situation the landlord has to deal with. Looking at it from the tenant's point of view, of course, they want to live in a good place. Many tenants are very reliable in terms of paying their rent. When they live in unsanitary conditions that are infested with insects, and ceilings are falling down, the heat is sporadic, yet they're paying their monthly rent. They're not getting in justice what they're entitled to get. So we have a situation with regard to the tenants. And when there is a fire and the building is torn down and a more expensive building is put up, and they have no place to go, no place to live, they can't afford the rents. You can see the situation obviously from the point of view of the tenants. From the point of view of the real estate developers will tell you, well, if I build affordable housing, I'm not going to make as much of a profit. Sometimes I can just barely break even with rising costs, inflation in terms of salaries to workers, building materials, all of that. This cuts into my profit. And so if I just go for affordable housing, I'm not going to recoup my money. If I go for more luxurious housing where the rents are higher, my initial outlay might be a little bit more, but I'm making more money on the monthly rent. And so I have to go in that direction. From the point of view of the village, of course, you want to attract developers who have a good track record, who will pay their property taxes to help to subsidize the village services. Certain builders are perhaps better known for that, and so that might be a priority in terms of who the town wants to deal with. All of those become then factors in the mix. And for the average resident in a community like Farmingdale, they want peace, they want harmony, they want good stores, good schools, good public services in terms of sanitation, in terms of policing, and they pay their taxes, so they want those good services provided for them. So we see the complications involved in affordable housing. It is not a simple issue. It is certainly a need on Long Island, suburban community, in urban communities. It's a need throughout the country. But advocating for affordable housing and providing good affordable housing becomes a real challenge. It's a challenge for a community. It's a challenge for the builder. It's a challenge for the tenants who want, obviously, a good place to live. I think this type of situation that the tenants experienced in Farmingdale show the complications. Not all tenants are going to be able to have the patience and the persistence to advocate for themselves. Not all of them will have available the services of a university, law school, to assist them. But certainly they did not have the funds to provide for legal representation vis-a-vis a village which is certainly more well funded through their insurance companies. So we can see the problems, but also the importance of justice being done. Certainly those tenants deserve a good place to live. And the idea of gentrification, of moving them out so that others can come in who are wealthier, raises the question, where will these tenants go? These tenants who are hardworking people. So again, the issue becomes one of justice, one of fairness on all sides. This particular outcome, this building of these 54 units of affordable housing at rather reasonable rents, is a great outcome. And certainly it is an outcome that would lead to good housing in many other communities. And something, of course, that should be looked at and hopefully emulated. And emulated, we would also hope, without lawsuits being filed.